If you like your true crime podcasts with real investigative journalism, you'll love Unravel. Unravel is the ABC podcast that investigates a new case each season. It's won podcast awards, journalism awards, and it's had millions of downloads. Unravel will have your headphones glued to your ears. Search for the Unravel podcast now for award-winning true crime. You can find it on the ABC Listen app.
ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
So today, we were in the weeds and at the tip. The Erin Patterson trial is really taking us to some unglamorous places. I'm the ABC's court reporter, Kristian Silva.
And I'm Stockwell. It is Wednesday, the 14th of May, and we've just finished the 10th day of this trial. Welcome to Mushroom Case Daily.
The small-town mystery that's gripped the nation and made headlines around the world.
Ms. Patterson admits she lied to police about foraging for mushrooms.
A doctor says he told Erin Patterson she could die without urgent treatment.
At the heart of this case will be the jury's interpretation of Erin Patterson's intentions.
It's a tragedy what's happened. I love them.
Just out of court, following Erin Patterson's trial. Kristian, can you take us through what we've heard today? Just a wrap of the evidence.
A lot of the key evidence today was actually things that we could see in the courtroom, not just people talking, which was nice. We saw footage today of Erin Patterson a few days after the lunch at the local tip, where she was seen dumping a food dehydrator. That item was later seized by police, and police say there were traces of death cap mushrooms found on that dehydrator. We also heard from an expert who tested leftovers of a meal that was found at Erin Patterson's house, and she said there were no death cap mushrooms in what she analysed. We also concluded our lecture into the study of mushroom taxonomy, which began yesterday from the esteemed Dr. Tom May.
I feel like I'm very well versed in the taxonomy of mushrooms after the last sort of day and a half's worth of evidence. So
the colours, the names, even the smells.
Even the smells. We'll get to that in a little bit later of this episode. But Kristian, I want to start with the dehydrator. Now, this is something that police say has residue of death cap mushrooms in it. It was recovered from one of the tips near Erin Patterson's house, and we actually saw a video today of it being dropped off at that tip.
That's right. So just to rewind a little bit, this lunch happened on a Saturday in July 2023, and prosecutors say that the 4 lunch guests fell really sick after eating a beef Wellington prepared by Erin Patterson that allegedly was laced with death cap mushrooms. Now, Erin Patterson also went to hospital in the days after this lunch, but was discharged 2 days later. Prosecutors allege that the day she was discharged, she went to the local tip or landfill, and there was security footage played to the court today of her driving in to this site, stopping her red vehicle near a large green shed and taking something out of the boot and taking it into the shed.
Do we know if that was the dehydrator? Is that what's being alleged here, that the item was the dehydrator that she was putting into like an e-waste bin or something?
So prosecutors say that that item she was carrying was a food dehydrator, which was found to have contained traces of death cap mushrooms. Now, the 4 lunch guests, 3 of whom died, prosecutors say suffered from death cap mushroom poisoning. But prosecutors say that Erin Patterson herself did not.
Yeah. And we heard from the bloke who runs the tip, because the police called him like, hey, have you heard anything about this? Have you seen anything on your videos? And he was like, yep, they've got this video here. He sent that video to the police, and then someone's gone down and recovered this from the bin and handed it over to the police. Is that right?
That's correct. So he received a call from the police. What they did was they went through their security footage. So this is a couple of days after Erin Patterson went there. They tracked down the footage of Erin, and they also found the item that she's put into the bin. It was a food dehydrator. And this is an item that we've talked about previously in this podcast. We've also talked about the origins of the dehydrator, how it was purchased about 3 months before the lunch, and that Erin Patterson had been talking to her friends online about how much she loved using this dehydrator.
Yeah. for most of the rest of the day, or certainly for the first half of the day, we were all about mushrooms. We had another game of Spot the Mushroom with Dr. Tom May.
We did.
But one of the things that I found really interesting through most of the morning was the evidence from Dr. Camille Truon, who was talking about, she's the woman who tested the Wellington. So she was sent the remaining Wellington that was pulled out of the rubbish at Erin Patterson's house, and it was taken to her, and she did the testing, and actually at her laboratory at home, so at her home lab. What did she find when she did the testing on that?
So Dr. Truong's testing did not reveal that there were death cap mushrooms in some leftovers that were found at Erin Patterson's house after the lunch. In fact, the only mushroom traces that she could find in this meal were common supermarket mushrooms. Now, just to kind of explain this a bit, because I think it is a little bit confusing at times, prosecutors allege Erin Patterson deliberately put death cap mushrooms into individual portions of beef Wellington consumed by her lunch guests. But the prosecutors also say that the meal that Erin ate was not contaminated. So I hope that explains it a bit.
Yep.
Now, we know that in the aftermath of this meal, Erin Patterson was questioned by numerous doctors and authorities about the mushrooms that were served. And she said that they came from a combination of the local Woolworths and from an unspecified Asian grocer somewhere in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne.
Yep.
So given that the lunch guests were found to have consumed Amanita phalloides, which is death cap mushrooms, Dr. Truong was asked about the availability of death cap mushrooms. And she said they're not available in the shops. You can't find them there because mushrooms in supermarkets are cultivated, whereas things like death caps grow in the wild. And she said it would be impossible to find a death cap mushroom in a supermarket.
Yeah, she was quite strong on that. It was questioned a number of times, and it seemed like, the toxicologists who were talking to her, getting her to check this evidence, kept saying, well, look, these are the source of the mushrooms. Could it be this? And every time she was like, well, no, these can't be cultivated. The only way you can get them are from wild mushrooms that, growing under oak trees, as we heard from Dr. Tom May. So it was really interesting hearing that. And that, she, I think at one point she even said even an independent shop wouldn't be able to forage the amount of mushrooms they would need to actually sell them in a shop. It just wouldn't be something that they could do. So I thought that was really interesting. And so, yeah, we're still not sure on the source of the death cap mushrooms. Earlier in the day, we had more from Dr. Tom May. The lecture on mushrooms continued. That was, the defence questioning him for hours. Lots of conversations about how hard it is to identify death cap mushrooms in the wild, and lots of comparisons between them and other mushrooms. And Kristian, you've kept a list. Are you going to take us through the scientific names? What are you doing here?
I'm going to try. So yesterday, Dr. May was shown a series of images and was asked whether they were death cap mushrooms or not, to which he basically said they were, and he was proved to be correct. Today he was shown 17 other pictures of various mushrooms, not death cap mushrooms, but to a layperson like me, I have to admit they kind of looked pretty similar.
Yep.
And even Dr. May conceded that there were aspects of these varieties that do have some similarities to death cap mushrooms. I'm going to run through the names because I know there's some keen nature watchers out there. So he agreed that there were some similarities with the stubble rosegill, Udomanciella gigaspora is another one.
You've nailed that.
That one doesn't have a common name. That seems to be the name. Honey mushroom, buttery colebia, and another one, spotted stem ringless amanita, and spring field cap. These are all mushrooms that people have reported sightings of in Victoria. Whether or not those sightings are accurate is a whole other matter, but people have claimed to have seen these mushrooms growing in the wild in parts of Victoria, including Gippsland, which is the region where this entire case centres around.
And those ones are safe to eat? Is that what we were getting at?
Some are, some aren't.
Okay, yeah. And, the thing that surprised me with a lot of this questioning was just how long Dr. Tom May was questioned by the defence for. It really was, basically a whole day of evidence that he was giving, about half a day being questioned by the defence in the end. Do we know much about what their strategy is or what they're trying to get at here?
Sophie Stafford, one of the defence barristers, took Dr. May through this exercise today for, I reckon, at least 45 minutes. It was pretty grueling, but it all sort of led to a final series of questions where Dr. May repeated something that he said yesterday, which was identifying species of mushrooms in the wild is a challenging task, even for experts like him who've been doing it for years. And he said that in terms of mapping the taxonomy of mushrooms in Australia, from a scientific level, there's a lot that needs to be done. Maybe hinting that there's, future funding that's required for scientific research in this area, which is seriously lacking at the moment. And he actually mentioned as well that in 2024, I believe, in a completely unrelated case, there was a woman who ate Amanita phalloides, death cap mushrooms, after picking them supposedly from her front yard. And it was a terrible accident and she died. And he said as a result of that, there were definitely calls for more public awareness about the dangers of wild mushrooms.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what else we hear about the source of the mushrooms over the course of this trial.
Yeah, and let's also remember that prosecutors allege that Erin Patterson travelled to the areas of Lock and Outram, which are near her home in Leongatha, and these are two areas where the prosecution alleges that there were postings made on the iNaturalist website where death cap mushrooms had been cited. So we will probably hear more about that as the evidence continues.
Yeah. Something that I've noticed as we're going through this trial, the way that the witnesses are questioned is that you'll have the prosecution call a witness, they'll do a lot of questioning with them, the defence will then question them for a bit, and then often the prosecution comes back very briefly at the end, sometimes a few questions, a few pickups here and there. And I noticed today Dr. Nanette Rogers talking to Dr. Tom May, asking about the smell of death cap mushrooms, and there was this exchange where she just asked, what is the smell of them like? And Dr. Tom May said, look, when they're picked, they're quite a sweet. It's quite a sweet smell that he noted, and then once they're dried, I think what was the wording? I've got the wording here. When they're dried, he found the smell to be very unpleasant.
Yes, that's correct. And that sort of triggered something in my memory. So I went all the way back to the prosecution openings. Mm-hmm. And I found this line that Dr. Nanette Rogers said way back a couple of weeks ago. And she said that in a later interview with authorities, Erin Patterson had talked about having mushrooms in her house that also smelt pretty bad. So that was referenced. So I guess we'll hear more about that as well.
Yeah. As well as all of this evidence today, Kristian, we also had a bit of medical evidence through the afternoon. And I will openly admit at this point that I did struggle to stay focused as this was happening. It was a lot of just kind of detail of different medical reports, things like that. Is there anything worth diving into or that you want to mention from that evidence this afternoon?
I think briefly, Professor Andrew Burston, who is a very experienced doctor and intensive care specialist, said he reviewed some of Erin Patterson's medical records in the days after the lunch. So she was cared for by various health authorities, and he said, he didn't check Erin himself, he's just looking at the paperwork. And from his examination of what he'd seen, he concluded that it appeared that Erin Patterson had suffered from some sort of gastro illness in the days after the lunch. However, he said it did not appear to be that severe, and we know that days after the lunch, Erin Patterson was discharged from hospital. Now, keep in mind, at the same time that Erin was discharged, 4 of her lunch guests were really sick, and 3 of them actually died very shortly after that.
Yeah. I want to get some questions that we've been sent in from our audience, but just quickly before we get to that, the jury got a little bit of free advice throughout the course of today.
They did. When they walked in this morning, they were given a friendly reminder by the judge just to be a little bit careful about what they say when they're coming into court. Anyway, that warning seemed to have been accepted pretty well. But later on in the day, after one of the breaks, the jury came in and you could hear some laughter that was coming from their jury room. And as they were led into the courtroom, the tip staff, Mr. Hastings, shushed the jury and put them in their place. And some of the jury members looked a little bit sheepish, like they'd been caught, doing something they shouldn't have been doing at school. So the jury was very well behaved after that.
It's nice to give a mention to Mr. Hastings as well, the tip staff, who does a wonderful job of keeping the court in order. In fact, when I was in the other day, I wasn't sitting in the media seats and was on my phone and was sharply told off to not be on my phone, because unless you're a member of the media, you shouldn't be on your phone. And I looked just like an ordinary member of the public at the time.
Yeah, his job is to maintain order in the courtroom, and he's done a brilliant job. He's one of the tip staff that we see down in Melbourne in the Supreme Court. Lovely guy.
Yeah, fantastic. We do have some questions from the audience sent in today as well, which I'd love to get to. You can send us an email, mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. We're reading through all of them, and we love hearing your feedback, your thoughts generally. I've got one here from Jess, who is listening in Castlemaine. She says, love the show. Thank you, Jess. And she's wondering, who are the prosecution actually representing? Are they representing those who've died, so the lunch guests, or the state?
They're representing the state. So at the start of a case, police are the prosecuting agency, but when you get to somewhere like the Supreme Court or even the county court in some other cases, the case is transferred to the Office of Public Prosecutions, and the head of that office is the Director of Public Prosecutions. So sometimes you hear the DPP and OPP used interchangeably, but essentially it is the state.
Yep. We've had a few questions about the iNaturalist website and Erin travelling to areas where there were postings on that website. Kate, Zoe, Simone and Jock have all written in. And I know we did touch on this briefly earlier. I included this question in the little document here before I knew you were going to talk about that. But yeah, they just want to know basically what we know about that at this stage.
So what the prosecution have said was that postings were made on the iNaturalist website where effectively death cap mushrooms were tagged in Outram and Lock in April and May 2023. So you're talking, 2 to 3 months before this lunch. And the prosecution claims that Erin went to those areas. One of those alleged trips, and this is based on mobile phone service data that the prosecution claims it has, is that Erin went to Lock and Outram the day after one of these posts was made.
Yep, right. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about all of that over the next week or so. So Kate, Zoe, Simone, Jock, everyone else who's flicked us an email about that, keep listening to Mushroom Case Daily, and we'll keep you up to date with what's going on in court and what we're hearing. Another question here from Meng from Barcaldine. They are so used to seeing Colin Mandy as Erin's defence barrister doing the cross-examination. But, we heard today and yesterday we had Sophie Stafford doing some cross-examination. Ming's wondering, is she an experienced barrister giving Colin a break so he can do some admin work? Or is there some strategy involved in changing from Colin to her for questioning?
It's pretty common in a big trial like this to have multiple barristers on both prosecution and defence teams. And the way that these teams are structured, it's kind of a hierarchy thing. You have your lead counsel and then what they call junior counsel, which, I'm not a lawyer, but I kind of find calling really experienced lawyers junior a little bit demeaning, but hey, that's just me.
Yep.
So Sophie Stafford is the junior to Colin Mandy. So she has been given some witnesses to cross-examine. It's not just Tom May, it's been a few others during the trial. So I wouldn't really read too much into that. To reach the rank of barrister, you've got to be a pretty good lawyer. And also it's worth mentioning that there's been times on the other side of the bar table where Nanette Rogers has taken a break and the juniors, Jane Warren and Sarah Lenthal, have asked questions as well. These other barristers are pretty busy, and even when their team captain, if we'll call them that, is on their feet, you can see that they're busy scribbling notes, passing them along to whoever it is that's making submissions. They're pretty busy and they're involved the whole time.
Yeah. Thank you, Kristian. Thank you for a wonderful question as well, Meng. And also in the segment I'm going to call More of a Statement, which, this is a wonderful actual point that Andrea has sent in here. We've been talking the last couple of days about whether lunch is provided for the jury and what it's like being a juror. Andrea has been a juror before as well, a couple of trials in Victoria and Queensland. And she mentions the only time that lunch was catered was when the jury was sequestered. The rest of it, they brought their own lunch. She says they were also discouraged from discussing the trial outside of the jury room, and also wants to point out that the hardest part of being a juror is remembering that you can only base your decision to convict or acquit on the evidence presented. It's a tough gig, but the judge gives clear direction on this before the jury retires.
And we'll definitely hear that again. We heard that right at the start, and Justice Beale will be hammering that home once all the evidence is done and the closing addresses are completed later on.
And Kristian will be back in everyone's feed tomorrow.
Yep, more witnesses taking the stand.
Thank you so much for listening to Mushroom Case Daily. If you have a question you'd like us to answer, get in touch, mushroomcasedaily@abc.net.au. Make sure you are following Mushroom Case Daily on the ABC Listen app. And if you're listening somewhere else, please leave us a review, give us a rating. It makes it much easier for other people to find us.
Mushroom Case Daily is produced by ABC Audio Studios and ABC News. It's presented by me, court reporter Kristian Silva, and producer Stephen Stockwell.
Our executive producer is Claire Rawlinson, and many thanks to the Victorian Newsroom and Audio Studios manager Eric George, and our true crime colleagues Tim Roxburgh, Rachel Brown and Yasmin Parry for helping make this show a reality. This episode was produced on the land of the Gunai-Kurnai people.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.
An hour.
1 hour.
So I had this pig and I'm rubbing its stomach.
2 mics.
2 microphones.
So sound wave travels into the ear canal and it hits the eardrum.
Unforgettable stories.
Strutting, fluffing up your neck feathers, making booming sounds in your throat.
And you use the word really. And the answer to these reallys is always yes.
Hear the latest from Conversations. Find it on the ABC Listen app.